2020 was a nightmare. I would never want to see that again in life. I was working at Wendy's Highway 49, and they started letting people go due to the COVID. I've been living here 6 years before the pandemic. My hours and stuff got cut due to that. And then after that, end up being laid off. I tried to talk to the landlord, and the landlord wasn't trying to hear, what I was saying,
COVID-19 magnified long-standing disparities in Mississippi. When the economy began shutting down, people with low incomes and people living paycheck to paycheck, hard-working people like J.T. Williams, they were the first ones affected.
Despite a national and statewide eviction moratorium, landlords in Mississippi pursued evictions at an even higher rate than before the pandemic.
The disaster caused a domino effect, as low-income Mississippians were faced with losing their health, their jobs, and their homes.
I thought I was going to be on the streets. I was depressed. I couldn't see straight, I didn't know what I was going to do.
To get around the eviction moratorium, some landlords who included utilities in the rent payment turned off the power, trying to force their tenants out. Low-income tenants were now left with no job, no income, and no lights or running water. Can you imagine being unemployed, sitting in the dark, while all the food in your refrigerator spoils? Well, that's what was happening.
Many of the thousands of Mississippians facing eviction didn't even know there was a moratorium in place, or they didn't realize they'd had to actively apply to avoid being evicted. What good were these programs if no one was helping people access them?
That's when the Mississippi Center for Justice stepped in. By April 5th, 2020, MCJ had set up the only statewide eviction hotline to counsel Mississippians faced with eviction. We immediately began helping people work through the process needed to qualify for the moratorium. Sometimes we went to court with them to prevent evictions.
I called the hotline to get the information. When I went to court the first time, me and the landlord was at court, and once they called me to the front, the landlord was saying, I owed him like $800. He thought I was gonna get evicted, but the judge told him that he couldn't evict me because I was on the CDC moratorium. I ain't never been in court like that, and I never want to be like that.
In the summer of 2020, the state of Mississippi used money from the CARES Act to set up emergency rental assistance programs to help tenants make their rent payments. But it was the same story. People didn't know about the funds or didn't know how to access the funds. So, MCJ continued to counsel people about the moratorium, and we also advised them how to access the rental assistance funds that could keep a roof over their heads.
I got rental assistance, and after that I went and found another job. I'm catching up, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. And I appreciate the help through the CDC moratorium and the organization that helped me.
MCJ was there for the mother whose entire family contracted COVID while she was out of work for 2 months. She came home to an eviction notice posted on her door saying she had to report to Hinds County Court, and she had to report the next day.
We counseled a woman whose husband died of COVID. While she was still grieving, the landlord threatened this newly widowed woman with eviction.
A gentleman here in Harrison County was locked out of his house when he couldn't pay rent. His landlord had taken him to court, but he couldn't appear to plead his case because he had COVID.
There were people who lost their jobs while they were hospitalized and found themselves facing eviction as soon as they were released.
Since April 5th of 2020, MCJ has fielded calls from more than 400 Mississippians facing eviction statewide.
MCJ was able to take the initiative, create a framework for delivering service, and immediately begin filling the huge gap between government assistance and actually getting that assistance into people's hands.
It got to that point that I said, I'm gonna be okay. I got a job, and I got rental assistance, everything, coming in place. I feel good. I feel good.
But for every J.T. Williams, there's another Mississippian who didn't find help in time. There are people living in motels, people living in their cars, and people who are homeless because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
And when the eviction moratorium expires June 30th, in just 12 days, hundreds more will be swept away by a tidal wave of eviction notices and legal judgments. MCJ has been at the forefront of the eviction crisis since the pandemic began. But now, even as the businesses are starting to reopen and the masks are coming off, our work is just beginning.